Many Canadians were not that impressed with the Liberals' throne speech. They say it was a lot of pomp and ceremony and not much else. The Conservative Party of Canada said they're already not going to support it. Joining me now to talk about it and the big speech is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley. Brian, the Liberals made a few promises, including creating 1 million new jobs. But let me ask you something. Are all of those new jobs in government?
Well, you might be worried about that, especially if you remember what happened with Rachel Notley and the Alberta NDP. That's where the job creation went when they decided, well, we've got to increase jobs, have the government hire everybody. I mean, they are talking about a national pharmacare program and a national childcare program and a national long-term care strategy. My view on this is the biggest beneficiaries, if they go through, will be bureaucrats in Ottawa micromanaging bureaucrats in provinces who actually administer these programs. Look, you mentioned pomp and circumstance. I love the pomp and circumstance of a throne speech. I've covered many of them. I remember Michaëlle Jean, and there was Haitian singing and dancing as she walked down the hall in one. I remember military tribute showing up at others. First Nations smudge ceremonies. There's always a lot of, and then, you know, the usher of the black rod and the mace being carried and MPs wandering down the hall. I love all of that, but have some substance in your speech. Instead, what we got were rehashed over Liberal campaign promises. I mean, some of them they have literally been campaigning on since the 1980s, and this government has been in power for 5 years now. So don't turn around and tell me you're going to do this stuff that your party's been promising since I was in high school.
Now, Brian, many journalists across the country were not too impressed with the Prime Minister taking over the airwaves, saying the Liberal Party should have really paid for that airtime.
Yeah, I mean, for people that don't understand how this works, this wasn't just the Prime Minister saying, I'm going to hold a news conference, and then the broadcast network saying, oh, we're going to carry what the Prime Minister has to say. This is the Prime Minister requesting that the networks give him the airtime, that it is handed over. And this is only supposed to be done for issues of great national importance. To show you how upset the broadcasters are, Global went out publicly telling the Globe and Mail, we received assurances that this was from the Prime Minister's office, that this was a speech of national importance and it wasn't going to be political. Well, it was a very political speech, but it was not of national importance. Everything he said about COVID-19, he's said before, or we've heard from our various premiers, local medical health officers, and the like. And then when he started rehashing his campaign promises that were included in the throne speech, that's when it got super political. I'm not sure that it would be wrong for the broadcasters to send him a bill, but I'll tell you this, it may have backfired because Aaron O'Toole and Yves-Francois Blanchet got up and did their responses despite both of them dealing with COVID, and they did quite well. He gave the opposition airtime they wouldn't have received otherwise.
Now, Brian, as we mentioned before, the Tories are not supporting the throne speech. The Bloc is not excited about it either. But it appears as though Jagmeet Singh and the NDP may be willing to support the Liberals as long as the Liberals come through with some of those promises right away, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So does this mean there will be no fall election?
Well, not yet. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles to get through, but in principle, the NDP say that they're going to support the throne speech. And then we've got to get down to, as they say, the devil in the details. So the NDP, their requests were two. We want paid sick days for people. The federal government can't regulate that across the entire country. They can only regulate that within workplaces that, like a broadcasting center, that is a federally regulated workplace. A trucking company, banks, but your local retail store, schools, things like that, they can't touch that. But the government has told the NDP, we'll work with you on your big ask, which is not lowering as they transition the Serb from one program into something else, that there isn't a reduction in the money that people get. I think it was going to go from $2,000 a month down to $1,600, and now the government's saying, okay, we'll leave it at $2,000.
Now, how is Parliament meeting since prorogation has ended? Are all the MPs back in the House, even during the pandemic?
No, there were a lot of discussions back and forth about that. Some like, Shannon Stubbs, Lakeland MP in Alberta, she said, look, if the kids are back in school, MPs can be back in the House of Commons. There have been measurements done that show they could even keep 6 feet apart and fit all MPs in the House of Commons because they're not letting the public in. You know, the tours that were a regular feature when you and I were on the Hill, Hal, those aren't happening now. So you're not, you know, the gallery's not filled with school kids aghast at what they see in question period. It's not filled with dignitaries. Those are empty. So the MPs would be able to take over the gallery and space themselves out. But the Liberals said no, they didn't want that. So it's still a hybrid model. Some MPs are taking part through video conference, and they're working out how to do electronic voting. So these are the things that are going on back and forth. There was a push during these negotiations for how the House should come back to not have committees reconstitute themselves until November. The Liberals didn't want the committees back because they don't want the WE scandal back. But they kind of snookered themselves. 2 days after they prorogued the House is when they brought forward this idea that we're going to change the Serb into something else. Well, that requires a committee to review the legislation on that, and therefore the committees will start up in early October to review legislation, but also to deal with things like the WE scandal. So finance, ethics, the government operations and official languages committee are going to start looking at WE again.
So, Brian, let's circle back to Serb for just a moment here. The Trudeau Liberals said one of the things they want happen is the passage of a bill to change the Serb payment into permanent assistance for Canadians. Could they have not have done that over the past month if they had not have prorogued?
Oh, thank you for pointing out the obvious, Al. Yes. I mean, they announced they're proroguing the House on August 18th. On August 20th, they said, we've got this big, important piece of legislation and we want it passed. And then on Thursday, the day after the throne speech, they said, we're really concerned about getting this passed. Canadians need this assistance now. Well, you know, just the way the House of Commons operates, it's going to take a while to get passed. They could have been doing that for the last month. We found out during the speech from the throne that the only reason that they prorogued the House of Commons was to shut down the committees. There was nothing new in the throne speech. There was nothing urgent that required them to prorogue Parliament back in August. And to be quite frank, if they wanted to deliver a throne speech, if you buy the Prime Minister's message that things have changed since the last election, and they undoubtedly have with the pandemic, they could have prorogued the House on September 22nd and come back on the 23rd. Here at the Ontario legislature, they have prorogued in the morning and had a throne speech in the afternoon because they didn't want to interrupt the work of government, but the government of the day said, okay, we're halfway through our mandate, we want to reset. These are all legitimate things. They shut down a month ago and stopped MPs from debating things like this legislation to give Canadian support so that they could get rid of the bad headlines.
Brian, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says it would be wrong for Ottawa to intervene and push through rapid COVID-19 tests being used by other countries. Why is that?
Well, Health Canada is feeling a lot of pressure from premiers, especially Ontario Premier Doug Ford, to say, look, our allies are using these tests already. These have been approved in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in the European Union, in Japan. These are our closest allies that we share everything with. Why have they been using them for months and we're not? And I know that there's an increase in requests for testing across the country. Ontario, which is doing the largest number of tests, went from having testing centers like the one around the corner from me that had no lineup, people sitting empty, to having lineups that last 7 hours. So a dramatic, new interest as cases started to increase, as school went back. And the premiers are all saying, look, these could clear our backlog. These could also keep our schools safer, especially some of the rapid tests that are easier on children. Instead of a swab going up your nose or all the way to the back of your throat, there are different ways of doing it. Health Canada should be approving these. If all of our allies, similar countries, similar health systems are able to do this, why is it taking months? And why can they not even give any sort of idea on when this will happen? But Chrystia Freeland says, no, we've got to make sure that they're safe. Well, if they've been used for months in Japan, the United States, Britain, and continental Europe, I'm pretty sure that we can be assured that they're safe and that they work.
Now, it appears as though we may be seeing a second COVID-19 wave. Active cases appear to be on the rise in Alberta, British Columbia, and as you mentioned, a dramatic rise in Ontario lately. Brian, How much is this due to the increase in testing by the various health authorities?
It's a mixture of both. Dr. Theresa Tam admitted that during a news conference earlier this week. They were releasing new modeling from the federal government. There's two things that are happening. Yes, an increase in tests. And as she said, when you test more, you will find more cases. Ontario, for example, went from 3,000 cases or 3,000 tests a day back in March, then up to about 20,000. Now it's hovering between 30 and 40,000 a day, and they're moving up to 50,000. So yes, they are, of course, going to find more people who are positive. But there is also an increase in what's called the RT value. This is the transmission rate. So for each person who becomes infected, how many people do they infect? At the beginning of this pandemic, it was as high as 10 in some areas. So you got infected, Hal, you would infect 10 people before you knew what was going on. We were able across most of the country to get that down below zero. And outside of hotspots, it likely is below zero. I mean, there's certain public health units in this country that don't have any active cases, but it's sitting at about 1.4 right now. So for every one person that gets infected, they infect another 1.4 people. That means the virus is growing, it's spreading. So that's worrisome. It's a combination of both. So we need to be concerned about the increase in cases, but we don't have to panic because there's a mixture of two things going on. And also at this point, hospitalizations, intensive care units, ventilators, all those things are not heading up in the same way that we saw them back in April and May across the country.
Let me ask you something. Have you been tested yourself personally?
I have not. I know many people that have, and none of them say that it's a very pleasant thing. I might wait until they come up with this thing that they've started in BC, the mouth rinse that they're using on school kids. I'll wait for that test. I'll wait for the one for 5-year-olds.
Okay. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, "We will not be able to get together for Thanksgiving, Brian, but may have a shot at Christmas." He also mentioned that we're in a second wave, but apparently that's not the same message as his medical officials. Is there maybe some miscommunication going on here?
You know, he's doing a thing that a lot of politicians have done that really irks me. I understand trying to make sure that the public is aware of what's going on. I don't like the idea of downplaying what's going on, but I also don't like them scaring the public. Dr. Theresa Tam was asked on Tuesday whether are we in a second wave? She wouldn't say that. She was pressed. She wouldn't say it. The very next day, the Prime Minister is on national TV saying we're in a second wave. I know that some local medical experts, the Chief Medical Officer of Ottawa has said that they're in the second wave, despite the fact that they have fewer cases than Toronto, based on population, based on per capita, they're doing much worse. It's one of the hotspots for the whole country. So yes, localized, you could say that, but I don't think that the Prime Minister should be going on national television and saying that to the entire country. It sends the wrong message. And, few people pointed out to me, the last time he told us we couldn't get together with our families for a holiday, he did the exact opposite. If you remember his trip to the family cottage, the Prime Minister's official cottage residence at Easter, after telling us not to do that very thing the day before.
Political reporter Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.